The Nintendo Game Boy remains as one of the most iconic handhelds ever made, even 30 years after its initial release in 1989. As we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Game Boy this week, we might be compelled to look back at some of our favorite titles from this era and examine what made them so special to us. What many fans of the Game Boy may not be aware of, however, is that there are new titles being developed for this system even today. Homebrew games are a popular creation for hobbyist coders on many different retro systems, but the limitations of the Game Boy create a breeding ground for some of the most pure ideas in game design, distilled into their most basic, important parts. In this video, I want to celebrate the legacy of the Game Boy by examining what I consider to be the 5 best homebrew games on the system, proving once and for all that any platform can be given a new lease on life if there are enough passionate fans out there to keep it alive. Before we begin, I just want to make the important distinction that the homebrew games in this video are for the original non-color Game Boy generation. Some homebrew games support the colorization features of the Game Boy Color hardware, and those are not going to be featured in this video. Without further ado, let's get started. Number 5, Super Princess's 2092 Exodus. Originally developed in 2016 for the Game Boy Jam 5 coding competition, this game would see a final public release that added 2 additional levels and a number of improvements over the original competition version. The gameplay here is reminiscent of Mega Man, that being an action platformer where careful jumps and precise shooting are the name of the game. You can speedrun this game in a number of minutes, but that's going to require precise knowledge of stage layouts and enemy placements, so hours of repetition and practice are sure to follow if you want to master the ins and outs of each stage. Luckily, you can switch between chosen stages in the menu if there's a particular section of the game that you want to practice on. This game is actually based on the engine of a prior Game Boy homebrew title by Monis Games, and this release expands on the features of that engine to create a more fleshed out experience for the player. For a Game Boy homebrew, the graphics and sound design are all pretty good, with enemies having a distinct, though sometimes derivative look, and each stage being treated to its own theme music. My only real gripe here is the character sprite that is very simple looking with stiff animations, sort of in a similar situation to the original Super Mario Land. All in all, Super Princess's 2092 Exodus is a fun little distraction on the Game Boy, where the immediacy of the challenge will compel a certain type of player to keep pressing forward. Number 4, Into the Blue. This is one of programmer Jonas Fishbach's 2 Game Boy homebrew projects, and this one is an attempt to bring an arcade puzzle game somewhat similar to Tetris Attack or Pokemon Puzzle Challenge to the original Game Boy. Into the Blue supports single-player puzzle solving and a versus mode, but since I don't happen to have a second player with a link cable handy, I guess normal mode is going to have to suffice. Before starting a round, the player can adjust the speed of the rising tiles, as well as the difficulty and music choice, standard options that you'd expect to find on any arcade puzzle game worth its salt. Instead of being a straight clone of another puzzle game concept, Into the Blue elects to try out its own gameplay style to varying results. Matching 3 or more tiles will clear them from the board, but instead of selecting them with your cursor will instead act as the swapping method, moving a tile into the space that it previously occupied as you move around the board frantically trying to match as many tiles as possible. You're going to want to try to keep those vertical towers from piling up because your cursor isn't able to swap into an empty space, leaving you trapped in a corner if you don't plan out your moves accordingly. This can be a bit of a frustration for players who are more used to a game like Tetris Attack, where you have free reign to move your cursor all around the screen. Personally, I find that the best strategy here is to try to create matches as low as possible on the board, while leaving yourself enough room to swap around, finding that balance between mobility and matching. If you can get past the quirks, you'll find that Into the Blue is a wonderful little homebrew game that boasts quality on par with many of the other simple, awesome puzzle games found in the commercial library of the Game Boy. Number 3, Polka Sheep. Here's another Game Boy Jam game by Monty's Games, the same creators behind Super Princess's 2092 Exodus. This game was developed for the 2017 edition of the competition, and participants this time around were saddled with the restriction of only being able to use one button for the gameplay of their entry. What resulted was a highly creative use of the limitation, giving us a unique little puzzle platformer that draws few comparisons in the wider scope of gaming. Players make use of the A button to propel the jumping sheep to try to reach the level goal and continue onward, waiting for the arrow to point in just the right direction for an optimal jump. As the levels count up higher and higher, you'll come across various new obstacles, enemies, and platform types to scale up the difficulty of the simplistic gameplay loop. If you lose all of your hit points, your run is over, no continues, and no handholding. This can lead to some understandable frustration and accusations of artificial difficulty, but the game cares very little about those, taunting you with the game over screen and tacitly challenging you to do better next time. For the concept alone, Polka Sheep is an easy recommendation, and though it may not have a stranglehold on your attention for very long, or compel you to reach the highest level, it shouldn't be hard to see why this fits in as one of the most admirable homebrew efforts on the system. If you want to read more about this game and some of the other Monty's Games development projects, there are some interesting blog posts about these that I'll be sure to leave in the video description, illuminating the specifics of the process as well as the peaks and valleys that came along with it. Number 2, The Bouncing Ball. Yet another Game Boy Jam development project is here, this one being for the 2015 competition and developed by Cabbage. Normally I would look down on a game that has no music and a single-digit number of sound effects, but the sheer quality of gameplay here cannot be denied. The concept is simple, you just bounce a ball on different platforms, timing each bounce properly to reach the end goal of each level. The game comes bundled with 50 levels, and a fair learning curve that acclimates the player to each gameplay mechanic masterfully. You can marathon through every level of the game as your overall running time ticks upward, or you can practice any level that you want out of order if a certain tricky part is leaving you struggling to progress. There's also a password system that allows you to skip to any level in marathon mode, useful for those who might be trying this on real hardware without access to save states. There really isn't much else to say about the bouncing ball. What you see is what you get, and what you get is a lovely little puzzle platformer that exemplifies nearly every quality that made the original Game Boy such an appealing system. Number 1, Tobu Girl. Developed in 2017 by Tangram Games, this is a simple but addicting arcade platformer reminiscent of the popular mobile game Doodle Jump. This homebrew game comes with all the bells and whistles, with sound design, graphics, and animations all getting an A+ in my book, especially for a homebrew effort on an 8-bit system. Gameplay-wise, Tobu Girl lays claim to a few distinctions from its inspirational material, most notably allowing the player to boost directionally in the air 3 additional times before landing on a platform, as well as a ticking clock that must be managed with extra time pickups in order to complete a level. Many failed attempts are sure to ensue if you choose to pick up this homebrew game, and your highest attempt will be marked with a flag on the minimap on the right side of the screen, until you're able to complete the level and unlock the next one. With 4 total levels, there are sure to be some thrills and spills along the way, with new obstacles and platform types to adapt to as you press onward. I could sit and gush about this game for several more paragraphs, but I think you get the gist of it, and if you've made it this far into the video and have never tried Tobu Girl, you have no excuse not to be downloading this right now and loading it up on your Game Boy player of choice. Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this short list of homebrew games for the original Nintendo Game Boy. There are so many homebrew games on the system that didn't quite make the cut. It was really difficult for me to trim some of these off the list, so I highly encourage you all to dive into the world of Game Boy homebrew if this is a subject that interests you. I'll be sure to include some links down below in the description to help get you started, including a link to this new tool called GB Studio that lets you make your own Game Boy ROMs without any coding knowledge. I haven't tried it out yet, but I'm definitely going to. It sounds really cool. The Game Boy is one of the most simple but challenging platforms to create games for, and it really is an interesting case study in game design to see how these lines of code come to life as a game experience in such a restrictive format. Let me know down in the comments if there are any other homebrews for the original Game Boy that you enjoy, and who knows, maybe I'll do another video about these in the not too distant future. Anyway, thank you so much for stopping by, and I'll see you all next time.